If you were to meet a quietly wealthy retiree, there's a good chance you wouldn't know it right away. They usually don't look flashy. They're not chasing the latest financial trend, and the habits that help them build that kind of financial security are often pretty simple, and honestly, a little boring. Over the years, working with many people preparing for retirement, I've noticed that the retirees who seem the most financially secure often share a few very simple habits. And interestingly, those habits usually have very little to do with picking the perfect investment or finding some secret strategy. So in this video, I want to walk you through a few of the patterns I tend to see among what you might call the quietly wealthy retiree, and why those habits matter so much if your goal is to retire with confidence and peace of mind. The wealthiest retirees I work with don't look like what most people think wealthy looks like. They're not driving brand new luxury cars or wearing expensive watches. Most of the time, if you saw them at the grocery store, you wouldn't think twice about them. And that's exactly what quiet wealth looks like in retirement. See, there's a huge difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy. When someone has true financial security in retirement, they're not always trying to impress everyone around them with their possessions. Quiet wealth in retirement means you've got something way more valuable than the fancy stuff to show off. And you've got peace of mind. These folks understand that real retirement wealth isn't about status or outward appearance. It's about freedom. It's about never lying awake worrying about whether you can afford your medicine or your electric bill or the roof over your head. I've got clients worth several $1,000,000 who still drive 15-year-old cars and shop with coupons, and they sleep better than the person with the brand new Beamer and big house payments. So why does this distinction matter for people planning retirement? Well, because when you focus on building quiet wealth instead of looking wealthy, every dollar you save actually stays invested instead of getting spent on things that would lose their value more readily over time. The path to quiet wealth is actually pretty boring. Most people think getting rich should be exciting. They want to find a hot stock tip or the perfect investment strategy or some secret nobody else knows. And here's what I've learned. Boring financial behavior usually beats exciting behavior over the long term, especially in retirement planning. And here's why this matters more than ever. A recent study found that 36% of Americans earning over $250,000 a year say that they live paycheck to paycheck. Think about that. People making $250,000 still feel stretched thin. Why? Because exciting spending and lifestyle inflation usually grows right along with their income. But boring, consistent saving and investing, that's what actually builds wealth. The quietly wealthy retirees I work with didn't get there by trying to hit investment home runs. They got there by putting money in their retirement accounts every paycheck, buying low-cost funds, leaving them alone, and paying off their house. And here's the urgency. The average American retires at 64 with a life expectancy of around 78. That's only 14 years to enjoy the retirement that you've worked decades to build. You can't afford to waste time chasing strategies that don't work. Now, is any of this stuff exciting? No. Will it make you interesting at dinner parties? Probably not. But will it let you retire with confidence and actually enjoy those 14 years? Absolutely. Think about it this way. Boring in your investment means exciting in your retirement. While other retirees are stressed about market crashes and worried about running out of money, you'd be sleeping peacefully. Because while they were chasing trends, you were building something that actually lasts and is resilient to the changes in your future. Now, let me clear something up. Quietly wealthy retirees are not cheap. There is a big difference between cheap and being intentional with your money. Intentional spending means you think carefully about what really matters to you. Then you spend your money on those things, unabashedly. But you also cut back ruthlessly on what you don't care about. I've got clients who drive older cars but spend thousands of dollars every year visiting their grandchildren. Others live in modest houses but have amazing workshops for their hobbies. So how is intentional spending different from being cheap? Cheap people just want the lowest price everything absent of value. Intentional people buy based on the value and what matters to them. And I also see this in terms of time as well. As our time resource becomes more scarce, we also need to make sure that we are being intentional about how we allocate that resource as well. Here's something interesting that I've discovered about feeling wealthy. It's not really about how much you have on your statements, as many zeros we have, as much as it is about how much more money is flowing into our accounts than is flowing out. When you have that positive cash flow and surplus, that's when you would feel more financially secure. Now, here's how lifestyle discipline creates more freedom later. When you align your spending with your actual values instead of trying to keep up with others and looking over your shoulder at your next door neighbor, you usually spend less overall. And that difference compounds over decades into serious wealth. Something that might surprise you is that the wealthiest retirees that I work with usually have surprisingly simple financial strategies. While other people are trying to find the perfect mix of dozens of investments, having analysis paralysis, some of the best well-off clients that I see typically own a few things. Some index funds that are low cost, maybe some real estate, and possibly a few companies that they understand well. So why do many successful retirees not rely on highly complex financial strategies if I see them all over the internet? Because they've learned that complexity usually adds more fees, more complications from a tax perspective, and more ways that things can go wrong. They are what I call lazy but brilliant. They don't want to spend their time constantly micromanaging their financial lives or making complicated financial decisions. Instead, they've set up simple systems that work automatically. So why is a simple plan often easier to stick with over time? Because when you can explain your financial plan in a few sentences, you'll have more confidence in it during both good markets and the bad ones. What does simple but effective usually look like in retirement planning? Index funds for growth, some real estate for income and inflation protection, including our home, maybe a small amount of stocks if you understand them. That's it. The quietly wealthy would rather have a simple plan that they can follow for decades than a brilliant plan they'll abandon during the first market crash. One of the worst things that you can do during times of uncertainty. Now, here's where things get interesting from a planning perspective. While quietly wealthy retirees keep their investment strategy simple, they pay very close attention to the details that actually matter. What kind of details tend to matter more than people think? Things like their tax planning, their account structure, their withdrawal planning, and how all of their income sources work together, not just now, but over time. These boring details can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime if we can get in front of them. When I think about healthy planning in general, I think about the way that the preventative medicine system of our country works when at its best. What that means is getting in front of problems before they become bigger issues and cost more to retroactively and looking back fix after they've gotten to be too big of an issue. And after working with successful retirees for years, I've learned that attention is really the weapon that separates wealthy retirees from those who struggle. Not intelligence, not luck, not even high income. Just consistent attention to the details that matter in a world where our attention continues to get spread thin and thin as I have more flashing red headlines try to capture our attention on a regular basis. Let me give you an example of an aggregate of the types of situations that I've run into countless times. Someone comes to me with $1.5 million saved at 63. He's ready to retire and had calculated that he could afford his desired lifestyle. But there was one problem. All of his money was in one type of account, a traditional retirement account. He forgot to factor in taxes. In his tax bracket, that $1.5 million is really only $1.2 million in spending power. That's a $300,000 omission. Here's another example. I work with somebody in California who was convinced that Roth accounts were always better because you never pay taxes again. But they were in the highest tax bracket, paying almost 50% in taxes. Oh, and they were planning to move to a lower cost of living area during retirement. So every dollar that they put into their Roth accounts was costing them $2 in taxes that had to be paid up front. So why does attention to these details often separate a strong retirement plan from a fragile one? Because the quietly wealthy understand that retirement planning isn't just about accumulating a large pot of gold. It's about efficiently converting that money into sustainable income when they need it, that they can feel confident about that will be there in the future for their needs. One of the things that makes retirement planning difficult is that many of the decisions that matter most are not the dramatic ones. They're the quieter decisions around taxes, income, account structure, and how all of these pieces fit together. That's a big part of what we offer during our Healthy Financial Checkup. It is designed to look more closely at the parts of your retirement plan that may not feel exciting, but often having meaningful impact on your long-term financial confidence. If you'd like to get a clearer sense of where things stand in your own plan moving forward and opportunities ahead of you, you can schedule one using the link in the description below. Now, why do many people still feel uncertain even with significant balances? When I'd work with folks over time who have $2, $3, $5, $10 million saved, and they still feel worried about running out of money, that would surprise many of us who may not be at that wealth spectrum. This comes from a concept that the pain of losing a dollar is roughly twice that is equal to the joy of gaining one. Studies have shown this over time, and we get to a point where we are deathly afraid of losing it. And during times of uncertainty right now, where there is one thing after another going on in Washington, now is a time that many individuals are revisiting their investment plan and whether or not they are taking on more risk than they may be comfortable with. Why is consistency often more valuable than intensity in long-term retirement planning? Because wealth building is like exercise. Doing something moderate every single day beats doing something extreme once in a while. This is where that lazy but brilliant approach really pays off. The quietly wealthy set up systems like a business early on, automatically moving money to the right places so they don't rely on willpower or remembering to do it every month. How do quietly wealthy retirees tend to respond during market volatility? They don't panic. When markets crashed in 2008 or during COVID in 2020, they weren't the ones calling me wanting to sell everything. They understand that this is part of the ride. Because the biggest investment mistakes happen when people make emotional decisions during market extremes. Selling when everything's down, buying when everything's expensive. Try to have a circuit breaker that you have at a dollar value in your life that you pause and wait at least 24 hours before making the decision whether to spend or make a large money movement. Why is it important to have a plan that you can stick to in both good and bad markets? Because your investment returns don't matter if you abandon your plan every time things get crazy. The quietly wealthy built their wealth slowly and steadily using simple approaches that they understood, so they can stay calm when others panic. Quietly wealthy retirees usually know what enough means to them. One of the most important questions in retirement planning that most people never ask is, how much really is enough? So why do some people keep chasing more even when the numbers show that they may already be financially secure using some of the most conservative assumptions? Because they're playing a game with no finish line. They never define what that success actually looks like for them. I've worked with some of the wealthiest individuals that are some of the most unsatisfied folks that I've ever met because they haven't been spending their time and their resources in accordance with what mattered to them the most. And remember what I said about feeling wealthy? It's not about having a huge amount of balance that we have sitting on. It's about having more money coming in than going out. Once you know what enough looks like for your monthly expenses, you can figure out how much you need coming in to feel truly secure with even more wiggle room to spend that much more and enjoy yourself while we are still young and able to. Why is defining enough such an important question in retirement planning? Because without knowing your target, you'll either work longer than you need to, or you'll retire without confidence that you have what it takes. How does knowing what matters most change the way someone plans and spends? When you're clear on your values, every financial decision becomes easier. You spend generously on what brings you joy and cut ruthlessly on what does not. I joke that during the beginning of any financial planning relationship that I have, we have a large uncovering conversation that feels like a therapy session that digs into where we come from and the predispositions that we have surrounding money. Without knowing this, I cannot imagine how anyone would be getting a good directional approach for their retirement planning, since you might end up going in the wrong direction to begin with. It doesn't matter how fast you get there. Why do the happiest retirees often seem to have clarity around what they value? Because they stopped trying to keep up with other people's definition of success and figured out what success means to them personally. The quietly wealthy retirees I know aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones who figured out what enough looks like for their specific situation and then stopped chasing more once they got there. So what do all of these patterns suggest about how quiet wealth is actually built? It's not built through any secret strategy or complex investment approach. Why is the real secret usually not a secret at all? Because the quietly wealthy retirees got there by doing ordinary things extraordinarily well for a very long time. They maxed out their accounts as much as they could every year. They bought lower cost funds and left them alone, and they paid attention to the tax man and their account structures. They lived below their means and invested the difference, and they built systems that worked when they were sleeping. But most importantly, they used attention as their weapon. While others were distracted by the latest investment trends or get-rich-quick schemes, they stayed focused on the basics that actually work. So after everything that we've talked about, the boring habits, the intentional spending, the simple strategies, the system building, the attention to detail, what's the actual secret? It's knowing what enough means for you. And then doing ordinary things extraordinarily well and consistently for a very long time. That might sound too simple, but it's true. So the big idea here is that the retirees who seem the most financially secure usually aren't doing anything flashy. They're simply consistent with a handful of habits that over time quietly build financial freedom. But once you start thinking about retirement this way, the next question naturally becomes, how much do you actually need to live the lifestyle that you want in retirement? For example, if your goal was spending something like $10,000 a month in retirement, what would that realistically require in savings and income? That's exactly what I broke down in the next video. So if you'd like to see how that kind of retirement lifestyle actually works from a planning perspective, watch that video next, and I'll see you in the next one.